Does God exist? Okay, what do you think?
What do I think? Does he exist?
Right, does God exist?
In my opinion, no.
Okay, in your opinion, no. Why?
Because the scientific evidence that goes against all of the beliefs in the Bible, and just the beliefs of people that believe in God. They don't believe in science or evolution, and I do believe in that. So therefore, I have to believe that there is no God.
Okay, now all I can say is thank you.
How can you know that the Bible is true and not just a book written by a bunch of men on rules and regulations on how to live?
Good question. Now, obviously, I'm out here talking about Jesus, so the obvious important question when it comes to the Bible is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The historical accounts of Christ. How do we know that they're accurate? Great question. Bart Ehrman, who's at the religion department at UNC Chapel Hill, wrote a book that basically points out there are 400,000 manuscript errors in the earliest manuscripts we have of the New Testament. So there's no way that you and I can get an accurate picture of Jesus. What I resent about what he's writing is he doesn't tell the whole story. First point is, although there are somewhere between 200 and 400,000 manuscript variants in those earliest manuscripts, those occur in 25,000 manuscripts, which means you have at least 8 errors in each manuscript or fragment, a piece of manuscript, or at the most 16. So you see, when he comes out with his statement in his book, which was a New York Times bestseller, that, oh man, there are 400,000 contradictions or missteps in the earliest manuscripts, and therefore it's ridiculous to assume that you can get an accurate picture. What he fails to tell you, which he knows very well, is, yeah, and those 200 to 400,000 manuscript variations occur in 25,000 manuscripts. Second thing that he fails to tell you is the majority of those manuscript variations come from John chapter 7 verse 53 and John chapter 8 verse 11, which is the woman caught in the act of adultery. Well, guess what? Bart Ehrman didn't discover anything. Just get your NIV translation of the New Testament. And obviously in the footnote we read this pericope, this story of the woman caught in the act of adultery, is not found in the earliest Greek manuscripts. And the same is true in the footnote for the end of Mark chapter 16. You take those two passages away and you wipe out the majority of manuscript problems. Are there many others though? Yes, there are. But all of a sudden it's reduced. So how do you determine whether a document is historically reliable? I would encourage you to come up with some tests that you use. For myself, I've got 4. Internal consistency, literary style, archaeological evidence, and manuscript evidence. First of all, internal consistency. Are there contradictions that point to massive confusion on the part of the authors? No, for the New Testament, there's a tremendous internal consistency. Second test, literary style. Is the literary style, once upon a time in the land of Nod, wink and blink and nod, took a boat ride? No. The literary style of the Gospels is, at this time, in this place, with these people around, Jesus said this, he did that. It reads like the New York Times. It's eyewitness reportage. Third test, archaeology. Did Jesus float a boat on the island of Atlantis and sail to the island of Atlantis, on the Sea of Atlantis? No. He floated a boat on the Sea of Galilee. Archaeologically verifiable. Was he born on the island of Atlantis? No, he was born in Bethlehem, and he grew up in Nazareth, and he walked the streets of Jerusalem. Archaeologically verifiable places. Fourth test. Today we have over 5,200 Greek manuscripts or pieces of manuscript dated from the 2nd through the 10th century AD, all agreeing to an infinitesimal degree. There's no document from antiquity that can even approach the New Testament Gospels in manuscript evidence. Does that show the Bible's the Word of God? No. It simply shows it's historically reliable, the New Testament Gospels. So simply read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John as history and ask yourself, does the historical evidence point to Christ being a quack? If it does, reject him. Or does the historical evidence point to the credibility of Christ? If it does, trust in him. Yes, sir.
So I'm a scientist, and as we do science, the basic presupposition is that we don't presume any sort of external agents in the world, and that the world sort of functions on its own laws, and you can make experiments to demonstrate that a theory is, viable or not. You can falsify theories that way, and we've come a long way. We've learned lots of things that way. And so one of the questions that I always struggle with personally is understanding the resurrection and knowing that that's kind of an anomaly in terms of how the world works, and understanding how that integrates into our faith. On a daily basis, I don't think a whole lot about necessarily the resurrection. I think a lot about Jesus' life and what he said and did. So I was just wondering if you could kind of speak to that and what are your thoughts on understanding the resurrection while at the same time living in a society that's based on some of the achievements of science and such?
Excellent question. If anybody tells you that there's a contradiction between the Bible and science, they either have not read the Bible or I think they don't have an accurate view of science. I think you're right. Science is a careful, methodical observation of physical process. Modern science is based on the idea that there's a rational being who created it in an orderly way, and we have rational minds that can perceive reality, that can put 2 + 2 together and come to 4, not 5 or 6, that we can understand what's real. And obviously there's a basic presupposition there, which is my mind can perceive reality. That frees me to do science. It frees you to do science. The Bible contains no scientific literature. There's no biology, no chemistry, no physics, no geology anywhere in the Bible. That's why if anybody says the Bible and science contradict, I'm convinced they either haven't read the Bible or they don't know what science is. Science is a study of process. Second point. If you and I are standing under an apple tree, 100 times out of 100, if the apple disengages from the branch, it hits the ground. The law of gravity works 100 times out of 100. But if as you and I are standing underneath the tree, the apple disengages from the branch, but you and I reach out and catch the apple, it will not hit the ground. Why doesn't the apple hit the ground? Because we have introduced a hand into the equation, and that hand doesn't contradict the law of gravity, but it changes what happens. So, the Bible does not call us to change our view of reality. Rather, the Bible calls us to realize that there's a supernatural God who created the natural laws in the first place, and because he created the laws in the first place, he's more than capable of changing a natural law, of introducing the hand, so to speak. Third point. That is why the resurrection is not irrational. The resurrection of Christ is not stupid or non-rational. Instead, the resurrection of Christ is a statement that the God who created the incredible natural world with all its order and design and intricacy is more than capable of entering the picture and changing a natural law, and what you and I call that is a miracle. Now, why do we call it a miracle? Because it doesn't happen every minute, every day. So if anybody thinks that a follower of Christ is someone who goes around thinking, oh yeah, I just saw a miracle now 5 minutes ago. Oh yeah, there's another miracle that's going to happen 1 minute from now. No. The Bible is like ESPN highlights. And you'll notice when you read the Bible that miracles often cluster around certain individuals, like Elijah and Elisha, like Moses in the Old Testament, and obviously like Jesus Christ in the New Testament and the apostles. So I think that's a fundamental point that has to be made real up front, that if there is no supernatural God, obviously miracles don't happen. But if there is a supernatural God, it is not irrational or non-rational to believe that a miracle could happen because there's a supernatural God who can change a natural law and perform what you and I call a miracle. So then, if you allow for the possibility of a supernatural God, the question becomes, what does the historical evidence point to? Does the historical evidence point to Jesus really dying, really being buried, 3 days later, really rising from the dead, or does it not? Obviously, if Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are mythology, then there's no historical claim being made. But when you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you'll notice the literary style is not mythology. The literary style is historical narrative, eyewitness reportage. And obviously the claim of the Gospels is Jesus really did die. We saw him dead. He was really buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. We did not expect him to rise. We thought case closed. Jesus is dead, forget about him. But 3 days later, he appears risen from the dead, and in 1 Corinthians 15, written about 51, 52, 53 AD, which is 20 years after the event, Paul says, Christ appeared to over 500 people who saw him risen from the dead. Then when you begin to realize that many of those eyewitnesses died for what they claimed to have seen. They did not die for a belief. Many people will die for their beliefs. These guys claimed to die for what they had seen. The risen Christ, Jesus risen from the dead. That gives a ton more credibility to their claim, yes indeed, we saw Christ risen from the dead. Often people say to me, Cliff, the resurrection of Christ is simply something that Christianity borrowed from all these other religions. I say, really? Like which ones? Now usually they start stammering at that point. According to what I've studied, there's only one religion that predates Jesus Christ that talks about a quasi-resurrection. And that is the religion of Osiris and Isis from Egypt. And that predates Christ. But when you read about Osiris and Isis, you begin to realize Osiris was cut up into 14 pieces and killed. Then Isis, his sister, goes around looking for the pieces to put them back together again. She finds 13 of the 14. She puts them back together, and Osiris has this cloudy existence in an underworld. To try and compare that to the resurrection of Christ in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is absolutely ludicrous. It's unfair. Now, are there some type of resurrection accounts after the resurrection of Christ? Yes. But then obviously the point is, who borrowed from whom? If they're after the resurrection of Christ, it's obvious they borrowed from Christianity. So apart from Osiris and Isis in the Egyptian religion, there is nobody that has a supposed resurrection. And when you look at that resurrection of Osiris, it's really not a resurrection. It's 13 of his 14 parts being put back together so that he can experience an existence in a foggy underworld. When you read Luke chapter 24, Matthew chapter 28, Mark chapter 16, and John chapter 20 and 21, you have a dead person
Explain the genocide of the Old Testament, both in the destruction of humanity within the flood and the Israelites invading the Promised Land.
Okay, very hard question. To tell you the truth, that question makes me very uncomfortable. It's a hard question. Thanks for raising it, though. How do you think through God calling the Jews to judge the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Philistines, by killing them? Why did God do it that way? I do not know. But I think some points need to be made. First point, the Bible reveals that God is the cosmic judge of the universe, which means God is very different from me, from you. You and I are not called by God, by Christ, to go around judging people. But God is the judge, and there will be a day of judgment when I have to answer to him. Now, I don't like that. I don't like the authority of God to judge. In fact, I don't like judges in my culture, my society. I just wish we could all just be cool. But unfortunately, injustice is too prevalent, and people really destroy other people. And so God is the ultimate judge, and because he created us, he has the right, he is in the position to judge us for doing wrong, for destroying human life, for destroying ourselves. Second point, God was very patient with the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Philistines. He gave them over 400 years to turn away from child sacrifice, slaughtering babies as an act of worship to God, and they didn't. And so God said, enough, I am going to choose to judge you now. So, when the Jews were killing people in the Old Testament because God told them to, it was not a form of racism, it was not a genocide. It was God judging people for the evil that they had done. The proof of that is, a few hundred years later, God judged the Jews for doing the same thing, for sacrificing their babies on altars, child sacrifice, what the Jews were involved in, and God used first the Assyrians and then the Babylonians to sweep the Jews into captivity. So God is perfectly fair. This is not genocide. This is God, a just judge, judging different people groups for piling up too much evil. And he did it to the Jews a few hundred years after he did it to the Canaanites and Philistines. Next point. The Bible never says that all those children and all those people go to a godless eternity. In fact, I expect to see those children in heaven. God chose to judge wicked people, and a lot of innocent people were swept along in that judgment, be it the flood or be it those wars. Next point. In America, we love to emphasize individualism. I just do Testament scholar who insisted that because of the change in writing styles between 1st and 2nd Peter, that therefore obviously Peter didn't write those letters. Well, wait a second. Peter's and Paul are both very upfront about how a scribe helped them to write some of the letters. Not only that, C.S. Lewis took the test that Rudolf Bultmann used to determine if one person could really have written this document. C.S. Lewis took those tests that Bultmann used, applied them to Rudolf Bultmann, and said, see, it wasn't Rudolf Bultmann who wrote what Bultmann wrote. It was 5 different guys who wrote it. In other words, those tests are unfairly stringent. If I speak to homeless people, I can promise you I do not speak to them the same way I speak at on this campus. I change my speaking style, my illustrations. It doesn't mean it's a different Cliff. But yes, I alter my speech patterns. If I'm speaking to a homeless person, if I'm speaking to a group of kindergartners, I don't speak the way I would speak to you as a university student. So watch out for, quote, critical scholarship, because I'm afraid that they can get unfairly stringent in the tests that they apply. And that's been one of my points out here to my atheist friends out here who come out here. They say to me, I'm sorry, Cliff, you haven't given me enough evidence that God exists. Fine, no problem with that statement. There's not enough evidence that God exists, therefore I can't believe. But notice what you're saying to me. You're saying, before I can believe something, X amount of evidence has to be met. Fine. I would love for you to tell me now, what are you living for, and what is the evidence that whatever it is you're living for meets this incredible standard?
Essentially. So how do you defend that there is an objective value?
Okay.
I think all there is subjective value. Because
Okay.
it is all we have is our lives to live, and then essentially we're done after. It
Good.
doesn't mean anything.
Good thinking.
So
I'm
what
right
is
with
your
you.
what is your defense that there is objective value?
Good. Okay, well, first of all, I want to thank you for thinking so clearly. I mean, I've been out here arguing with atheists who say, oh, no, we do have meaning and purpose and value in an objective sense. No, if there is no God, you're right, we don't have any objective meaning and value. Okay, so why am I convinced that this man has just as much value if he was in a wheelchair than as if he was All-American in football. Because I am convinced that he was created by God for a purpose. And that purpose is not to make money and be an All-American. That purpose is to love God with his heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love his neighbor as himself. And guess what? He can do that from a wheelchair, a hospital bed, or he can do that as a CEO or as Tim Tebow.
So I understand,
really doesn't matter.
I understand those are your beliefs, but what is your defense that objective value exists? That doesn't really prove that it exists. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Right, but you understand it's consistent.
Yeah.
If I believe
understand,
that God
that's
exists.
your belief, and then my belief is opposite, and I can respect that. That's
Right.
your belief. But how do you prove that exists? Objectively?
Okay, good. But wait a second. Let's just clarify for everybody here. I've respected you for your intellectual consistency in saying, because there is no God, there's no objective meaning and value to life.
Okay.
It's all meaningless,
Sure.
except in a subjective way that I created. And so you saying, Cliff, I respect you for your intellectual consistency in saying, because I believe God created this man, it means he does have value, he does have purpose.
Okay.
Okay, so we're on, okay, so I respect you intellectually, you respect me intellectually. We're consistent, right? Okay, so then obviously the question becomes, what's the evidence that God exists? Right? Because it's real clear. We agree. If there is no God, the idea that this guy has meaning and purpose and value to life is a fantasy. It's a crock. So you're right. The question then is, does God exist? Okay, what do you think?
What do I think? Does he exist?
Right, does God exist?
In my opinion, no.
Okay, in your opinion, no. Why?
Because the scientific evidence that goes against all of the beliefs in the Bible, and just the beliefs of people that believe in God, they don't believe in science or evolution, and I do believe in that. So therefore, I have to believe that there is no God.
Okay, now all I can say is thank you. It is an honor talking with you. All right. Now, real loud so everybody can hear it. Why can you not believe that God exists?
Because I believe in science and evolution, and therefore in that belief they do not believe. That's how I have to believe that there is no God, essentially.
How does science contradict the existence of God?
By the theories of evolution.
Okay. So evolution disproves
because
God.
if you believe in God in the Bible, you believe that you were made in God's image, that he created you, essentially.
Right.
So I do not believe that. I believe that we are an evolved species of this earth. So therefore, I do not believe that God exists. Does that make sense?
Yes. But why have you concluded not just that evolution as a process is true, which I believe in as a theist,
Okay.
but you've accepted evolution as an origin, that we come from chance mutations and natural selection?
Yes.
Okay, now, sir.
Why is that so absurd? The universe is so
Wait a second.
incredibly huge. Why is that such a small chance? There's so many different possibilities.
Okay, but sir, when you tell me that evolution as an origin is true, you have parted company with science. That is a philosophy of
I
science.
believe in it, yes.
Okay, that's a philosophy.
I'm not
So
saying-
in fact, you don't reject God because of science. You reject God because of a branch of the philosophy of science that says there is no intelligent mind behind the process, whatever the process is.
Is there not
It's just chance and
scientific
fate.
proof of evolution, though?
Not
So
in
isn't
terms
it-
of
don't
origin.
They go hand in hand, essentially.
No. See, when you go from process to origin, you've moved from science, which is a study of process, to origin, which is philosophy. So you see, your real disagreement with God is not a scientific issue, it's a philosophical issue.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Are you sure?
Yeah, I understand.
You
where you're
understand
coming
that?
from. Yeah.
Okay, it's like, and that's a real clear point. I was debating a Stanford grad. It was a professor at the University of Wyoming, and he says, "You know, Cliff, what really bugs me is how Christians try and use science to prove God exists." And I said, "Yes, sir, that's intellectually dishonest. It's dishonest to say I can scientifically prove that God exists." But then I said, "Sir, wouldn't you also agree that for an atheist to try and use science to disprove that God exists is equally dishonest?" He said, "Absolutely." I said, "Well, then what do you say to Stephen Gould at Harvard, that biology professor who passed away a number of years ago?" He used to use evolution to intimidate the freshmen at Harvard into becoming atheists, saying, oh, come on, evolution is true, therefore there is no God. And he said, if Stephen Gould indeed taught that, that's intellectually dishonest.
Okay.
So I love this guy. He was really brutally objective.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
All right, well, I guess maybe the point I'm saying is then I don't believe that science can disprove God, but I believe that science can prove other, essentially, it can prove why, like my beliefs of why he doesn't exist.
Okay.
Which is evolution.
Can science tell you what the meaning of his life is?
No.
No. Can science tell you that this guy has value?
I guess not.
No. You see, those are not scientific questions.
That
Yes.
the universe is infinite,
Right.
then two infinites must exist.
But what does that mean? The universe is infinite?
It means it's ever expanding, never ending, right?
But does it have a beginning or not?
In one direction.
Yeah, in future, right?
Yeah.
But it has a beginning at some point.
Yeah.
That's infinite?
Yeah, but if something, if it doesn't have bounds, it's infinite in both directions.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought.
So God created, so you're saying, in your logic, what I heard was that God created the earth
Yes, sir.
originally.
Right. That there's a beginning.
Which means that God has to be at least more infinite than the universe.
Yes, correct. Correct.
I mean, so if the universe is infinite, then at some point perhaps they are joined. If both are infinite, they have to be of one.
What does that mean?
See, one wouldn't depend on each other if they weren't. If
Oh, I see. What you're saying is, if the universe is infinite and if God is infinite, then the universe doesn't depend on God for its
because
existence.
from what I got from what you were saying is you're saying that God is a separate entity than
From the universe, right?
So
Right.
it must be finite, because
Good.
without God, it cannot change.
No, I like your thinking.
But I mean, so you're saying it has to be set in motion, and whatever's there is there. It's constant. It's not changing. But if you were,
No, not changing. It can change, but it has a beginning. And God is eternal, and the universe is not eternal.
But okay, if it changes, God is a part of the system.
Well, he can be over the system.
But he has to be a part of the system
Meaning
for it
what?
to change.
Well, he's got to be
At
involved.
some point that he is, yeah.
He's
at
involved.
some
Yes,
point.
yes,
So at
absolutely.
some
He's
point-
involved.
But at some point, then you could see his existence. That's my problem. If he is involved, at some point you would find his existence.
Yes.
So, the only way for you not to be ever to be able to find his existence is for the universe to be finite and not changing.
All right, let me take a stab at it. I don't think I'm going to answer your question. I'm going to try, okay? But it's a very hard question you're asking.
It wasn't something posed. I guess it was just more of something to think about.
All right, yeah, okay. What Jesus and the scriptures reveal is that God is transcendent. Means God is not contained in the universe. He's beyond. Okay? But the second thing that the Bible and Jesus insist is God is immanent, transcendent, and immanent, which means he's here with us. He became man in Jesus Christ. By his Holy Spirit, he draws us to himself.
So he's a part of the system.
So he's both transcendent, he's bigger than the universe, he began the universe, but he's also immanent, meaning he steps into space and time, he steps into the universe and is involved. Both. Transcendent plus immanent. Present. Does that help?
So I feel like with that logic, you can't abide by the same, you can't say that, you have to say that God is a part of the system and at some point is discoverable.
Sermons, and the main point I've gotten from Christianity is that love is kind of what prevails, and that's what brings us into, like, gives us purpose and kind of helps us survive, loving each other and helping each other out and such. Is that one of the main purposes of the Bible?
It's one of the main points.
One of the main points. And then I was just kind of wondering, could that, I don't want to say tool because that's a really bad word, could that be a piece of kind of what Origin of Species is trying to say, that the people who are most successful move on to the next generation? Could that be, religion be part of evolution, I guess?
Okay, you've raised a lot of great questions. Okay, let me tick them off one at a time, okay? Thank you for the way you've asked them. I appreciate it. You're not offensive in the slightest. I really appreciate your attitude. All right, first point. In The Descent of Man, Charles Darwin writes, if you and I would have been raised in the same environment as hive bees, then women would kill their sisters. And there'd be nothing wrong with that. And the mother would kill her pregnant daughters because they're a threat to her, the queen bee. And that would be how we would have developed. I think that's clear thinking.
Yeah.
In one sense, he's being clear from his presupposition.
Very logical.
Very logical, exactly. So much of my experience contradicts that. What is my experience? My experience is some of my closest friends were raised in atheist homes. Today they believe in Jesus Christ. We're not just products of our environment. To tell you the truth, ma'am, next week I'm going to debate an atheist down in Texas who grew up Southern Baptist. Now he's an atheist. See, ma'am, yes, environment influences us, but no, ma'am, we don't have to believe what Mom and Dad believed. In fact, I have the utmost respect for Sarah and Angelina Grimke, two white women born on a plantation in South Carolina. They knew very well what greased the economic wheels of South Carolina: slavery. And yet they followed their conscience and contradicted their environment, joined the abolitionist movement, and fought for the abolition of slavery. Yes, environment is powerful in influencing us. No, there is more to you than Mom and Dad in your environment.
Okay.
You have a will, and you can contradict that will. And I'm convinced that if atheism is true, I understand what Darwin is saying, but my experience of life is you don't have to do what your environment or culture tells you to do.
But biologically, how does that play in? Because biologically, we do have to follow certain rules. Like I couldn't live probably in Antarctica because I'm not adapted to that.
Okay.
How does that play into religion? Because environment does play a big key in who we are and why we are.
Okay. I don't think you have to date the guy who says, "You're beautiful. Would you please go out with me?" I think you have a free will and can make a decision. I don't think you have to be a student at the University of Arizona. You could have gone to UCLA, ASU, or wherever. Okay? You don't have to believe in God. You could be an atheist, or you could become a Muslim, or a Jew, or a Buddhist. But I'm standing here saying, please read the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John for yourself, and ask yourself, Does the evidence of the way Jesus lived, taught, died, and rose from the dead point to him being reliable? And I think if you'll read those Gospels and examine how Jesus treated people, what he taught ethically, how he died, loving and forgiving his enemies, and then how he rose from the dead, you will have more than ample evidence to make a wise decision to put your faith in Jesus Christ. But you got to freely do that. No one can manipulate you or force you to do that.
I agree with all that. It's just what I'm saying is that because of your choices to be happy with religion or without religion, that positive attitude, doesn't that kind of influence your lifestyle and influence whether or not you have children? And people who are faithful and followers of religion tend to have more kids, and they tend to teach those morals onto those children that you need to pass that on. So
Great
doesn't
point.
that kind of play into the evolutionary chain somewhere in there, that religion is kind of actually helping the human population grow?
Well, I can promise you, if Jesus Christ didn't help people, I wouldn't want to believe in him.
Because I most definitely think religion is it's a great thing to have in your life if
Right.
you believe in it, but I was just kind of
Right, you
curious
bet.
as to...
Okay, now, you're absolutely right. One of the main reasons that I believe in Jesus Christ is because as I observe life, I see that Jesus' teachings make so much sense, lead to so much joy and peace and healthy self-image, hope for the future, that I am excited by that. But if Jesus Christ is just a positive spin-thinking artist, no. I'll tell you why. You and I can go to a lot of seminars in this great country of ours where we will hear a lot of motivational speakers tell us how important it is to be positive. I have very, very little respect for that.
There's no purpose in just positivity.
Exactly. Well, yeah. And not only is there no purpose in it, there's no basis for it, other than it'll help you get ahead. Excuse me? I'm going to believe something's true just because it's going to help me get ahead? No, thank you.
There's no actual faith.
I mean, if smoking weed supposedly helps me get ahead, I'm not just going to do it because it helps me get ahead. All right? I've got to figure out, is this true? Is this real? That's what I got. The truth question is far more important than what's going to help me make more money.
It goes back to faith. Always. It's your...
Yeah, but it also goes back to the search for truth,
Yeah.
right? I can promise you, I don't want you to marry a guy who can flatter you up one side and down the other, tell you what a great person you are, and lacks integrity, and really doesn't love you. And obviously there are a ton of guys who will do that to you.
Oh, yeah.
I think you know that just as well as I do, all right? And I'm saying, I think you'd be making a big mistake. I don't care how positive they are, how romantic they are, how much gush can flow from their lips. If they don't really love you, and if they're not a person of integrity and honesty, please don't marry them. Right? Okay, now the same thing is true with God. If God exists, I want to believe in him. If he doesn't exist, I want to face reality, and I'm going to go right down the path that Camus, Sartre, and Nietzsche went, which is, there is no ultimate hope to life. Let's be honest. We all go to the fertilizer pit. Hitler's in the fertilizer pit, Mother Teresa's in the fertilizer pit, and you and I are headed towards the fertilizer pit. And whatever we choose to do with our lives is ultimately inconsequential because it's just our choice. So if I choose to be a second Mother Teresa, bravo. And if I choose to be a second Adolf Hitler, bravo. It's my choice. It's all subjective, it's all relative. That's true if there is no God. But there's so much evidence that God exists.
Oh, I'm not denying he is. I'm just wondering if he's the whole system, the belief system is what's helping promote our species, I guess. Because
Well, yes.
there are
Faith in Christ necessitates, demands feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, respecting handicapped people, challenged people, loving and respecting every single human being on the face of the planet.
So I was wondering, then why is it that evolution and religion can't go hand in hand?
They can, but not evolution as a origin. Now, how he created you, I don't know. The Bible doesn't answer that, so I turned to science. And I think it's obvious to some extent God used evolution to create you. I don't know to what extent. I have a real problem with macroevolution because all the breeders that I know understand that there's a genetic wall that they pump up against. Although you can make a pigeon into a beautiful bird, you can't have a pigeon become a pig. Although you can breed horses and make them real fast, like thoroughbred racehorses, you can't breed a horse into a cow. You hit a genetic wall.
Well,
See,
how much
my
evidence
point is
behind
this.
the Bible?
I don't care how much time you give, whatever, I don't see order come out of chaos by chance. And the reason I say that is because, ma'am, I'm not very smart. And to get through Davidson College down in North Carolina, I had to study really, really hard to give the right answer on the exams and to pass and get out of there. And this idea that it just comes about by chance, order and design and rational thinking, gosh, that's a total disconnect for me.
There are so many species out there that have failed and no longer exist.
Yes.
They're no longer there. So, I mean, people who don't study fail. So, I mean, along with that way of thinking, there are failures out there in evolution. We are
Yes.
just the product of those who studied, the strong ones.
Okay, I agree. Obviously, a lot of species have died off. Okay, now, back to your original question about love. You're right. Jesus insisted that God loves you and he loves me. Now that's stupid. If you think about it, if the universe is as big as it is, and if God created it, do you know what an infinitesimal speck of dust you and I are compared to the vastness of the universe? So the idea that God loves you and me is stupid. It's absurd. Or else, it is the most important information